You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m., June 18th, 2023. And we're here to play the second letter of the Fickle Fiancés, a play-by-mail game from Dear Holmes. Calling it a game is stretching it a bit, but each week we get a new letter and we're trying to solve a mystery. I can see the chat is active. We've got 14 people here on the stream. Debbie was telling us about a play she was just in last week. And I can see all the regulars are here. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to start with a little presentation on the cipher from last week. So last week we got our first letter of this case, a long one. Started out with a letter from Watson introducing the case to us, and then taken over by Ruth Dresser, who tells us about her fiancé, who looked like he might have been the subject of a poisoning attack. She tells us about that case. We might review that before we open the next letter. I've got my notes here that I wrote up. And then at the end of the case, she tells us about a note she found in the fireplace, an obvious encrypted message. And we spent a little bit of time on the last stream, at the end of the last stream, working on this encoded message, and then we started working on it offline. And a couple of people solved it right away. And I spent 2 days working on it, and I tend to think that I'm reasonably good with these ciphers, not an expert by any fashion, but I got stuck. And I actually wrote 2 pieces of code to help me decrypt it, which failed. I'm going to tell you a little bit why they failed. But the first thing I'm going to do is try to make amends for not solving this cipher, pay tribute to those in the channel who did, and give you a little presentation on this cipher and how it decrypts and what it says. So that's what we'll start out doing, and then maybe we'll review the letter. There's one thing I wanted to point out that I'm not sure we caught, and then maybe we can look at my notes, and then we'll open up the next letter. Okay, so let's start with a little presentation of the cipher. All right, so there was the message we got. when we looked at that, we noticed a couple of key things. First of all, it looks like it's three basic symbols: a single hump, a double hump, and a triple hump. And then they're rotated at angles and fixed angles. That was a big observation. They aren't arbitrary angles. They're rotated in what I understand now is there's ordinal directions, there's cardinal directions. The ordinal is like north, south, west, east. Cardinal are the diagonal. Cardinal are something else. Cardinal are the diagonal ones. And then if you combine them all into a set of 8, you get the compass rose directions. And then we can see they're grouped in groups of 4. So here are our observation. 3 symbols, 8 compass road directions. And if you multiply 3 symbols by 8 directions, you get 24 combinations, which seems very close to our alphabet of 26. And then we noticed they were in groups of 4. And we made a couple, here are some questions we had and our guesses at answers. And this was all done during the stream. First question was, what is the basic unit? And if we've got 24 combinations, it seemed like you probably got each symbol is a letter. Does it read right to left, then top to bottom, the way you would read a book, or is it something else? And we talked about this a little bit. And it's really that last line that makes us fairly confident that it's reading like a book. Because if you were writing in columns, you wouldn't end your partial end there. You would end full columns, and only the last column would be partially filled. So we had pretty good confidence that it was horizontal and not this vertical version you see there. There's no other arrangement that seems natural. Then we had a question about, we're told this is a charred note found in the fireplace. Was any burned off? But it sure looks like, I mean, it looks different on the thing, but even in the printout, it's not as clear that this wasn't burned off here, but you would think if she transcribed it, she would make some note, or the game would show us a partial letter if we were meant to think that part of it got burned off. So that made us fairly confident that that was the full message, or at least that that ending thing is not an artifact of being burned. One question we didn't address, which seemed to me pretty important, is what's the 0 rotation? If we think there's some logic to knowing that this is the 0 rotation, if we're trying to link these up with letters of the alphabet, what's our 0? And it seems like it's sort of human bias that it's not going to be one of the diagonals. And if you look at those symbols, there's basically maybe 2 or 3. Either what's natural is that sort of the single hump C is our baseline 0, or maybe an upright U looking thing could be either the humps up could be the 0, the humps like a C could be the 0, maybe even the hump down could be a 0. That's actually significant if you're trying to logically line this up with letters. We'll look at that in a second. Then we talked about the significance of the groups of 4. And I think our intuition was that that's fairly common in encoding messages, that you would break it up into groups. Group of 4 is fairly common, just to help you write it down and encode it, and that it was not significant. We don't expect the word breaks to appear on the 4s. We don't expect there to be only 4-letter words. The grouping does make you a little bit more suspicious that someone could have rearranged these to be in columns or whatever. So it is something to keep in mind. And then the question we didn't really discuss, which is what threw my attempts off, is we've got a 24-letter alphabet if our hunch is right, and yet English is 26 letters. How should you encode that? And this is going to come back to bite me, and it's going to be the lesson I take away from this, but let's keep going. So we notice that we've got basically 2 dimensions for encoding this, the rotation and the symbol. 3 symbols, 8 rotations, this idea of using 2 dimensions should have brought to mind the Polybius square cipher, which is an ancient Greek cipher, which is another clue, because we've got some Greek names in this case, especially this club that we think might have written the message. So that might have been a key that we're on the right track. Now, traditionally, that's used in a square shape. So you can see 1 dimension on the X, 1 dimension on the Y. You fill in the alphabet in the middle. In this case, an ancient Greek alphabet of 24 letters fits with 1 to spare in a 5x5 grid. And then you can see how that's commonly been translated into English on the right. Now, notice that I and J is pushed into 1 cell. That's going to be critical for us. But the way you would represent the letter A then is a 1-1. So you'd use the 2 dimensions. So each letter is represented by 2 digits. So you can represent an A by 1, 1, and an E by 1, 5, and a V by 5, 1. And in the same way, you would use this. You would have humps on one side. There's 3 symbols on one side and the 8 rotations. There's no reason it has to be symmetric. If you do that, you get something like this. And I just want to illustrate that because it's not the same, because we've got 3 on one dimension, 8 on the others, there's 2 basic ways you could fill the alphabet into this grid. So these are grids where we've got the 3 symbols on one dimension and then the rotations on the other. On the left grid here, we have the single hump on the top row, and then you can see all the different rotations of that going around clockwise. No reason it has to be clockwise, and no reason that C-shaped single hump in the upper left has to be the A. If you started with a U shape and then went clockwise, you would get the U being the A and so on. But that was our sort of, if we had to make an initial guess, that's how we broke it up, with the single humps being the first set of 8, starting from A to H, and then the double humps going from I to whatever. The other way you could do it, which turns out to be the correct way, is to have the humps going on the first column. So our single hump is our first column down, the double hump is our second column, and the triple hump is our third column, with the alphabet going left to right. So the A is a single hump, and then B is a single hump, and then B is a double hump, C is a triple hump, all facing the same direction. And then if you rotate 1 click, then you've got the next set of letters, rotate 1 click, next set of letters. So if you're imagining that this is a way to do it, you've got questions about what grid is more likely. Is there a more likely grid? I don't think there is, so it could be either way. What rotation should be your starting rotation? In other words, where do you put the A? And then how do you fill in the alphabet when you've got 26 letters to fill into 24 cells? Ignore that last part about the Playfair key. That's a different cipher. That's a little bit similar. Now, putting the I and the J into 1 cell seems to be a historically common thing. I don't know where it first starts. It probably starts because initially, the alphabet evolves, and I and J may have been a single letter at some point. But this was a key thing that messed up me, that caused problems for me, because I didn't do this operation of putting I and J, and I just basically said, 24, 26, close enough. The last couple letters of the alphabet are rare. Let me not worry about them. So I filled out my grids when I was experimenting with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, and so on. And then when I got down to the end, I ended on X, and I had Y and Z that didn't really have a place. I figured I'll just throw them all into the last cell, something like that. All right. If you consider these options, then it turns out that one of them is the actual message. And there it is. It's this grid, the second grid I showed, and it's important that you put I and J in the same cell. If you do that, you can decode the message, and it says, David knows he has gone mad, come soon. I've just colored the words differently so you can see them. So the first word, David, is the first 5 characters, and the groupings of 4 isn't important. Now, a bunch of people figured this out, figured out the message, and I tried and wrote code to do it, and I failed. Now, so if you were trying to decode this is, I'm giving you the answer now, and I think you could get yourself on this page through theory. That this is the likely possibilities, but you don't know which orientation is right. You don't know which orientation starts out your A, so you've got 8 possibilities there. You're not quite sure if the I's and J's are combined, but that would be an important good guess. And maybe you could guess right that the C is going to start your A's. Otherwise, you'd have to try. One option is to try all of the possible ways you could sort of fill out those grids with the rotations and stuff, assuming there was a pattern. And that's what this slide is. We're almost done here. How to pick this one grid. And you could exhaustively check with the computer, which is what I basically tried to do. I assumed it was going to be one of these 2 grids. And then I wouldn't know which rotation should start us out as the 0, as the A. So I wrote code to try all of the different rotations and both of these grids. But I made a mistake in not putting I and J in the same cell. And that caused me to get gibberish. But how would you attack this if you didn't want to do it by computer and exhaustively try it? Well, it's basically a substitution cipher with some constraints. So you know each unique symbol matches to a unique other letter. So you could try all the attacks that you would do normally with a substitution cipher. You know that the most common letter is E, and the most common symbol in the cipher is this 3-shaped thing. So you might guess those are E's. That would turn out to be wrong. It's actually O. Your problem here is that it's such a short message that it's hard to get out statistics from it. But you would also notice that there might be a double letter here down at the bottom. You're not sure it's a double letter because of the breakings into groups of 4. It could be the end of one word and the start of a next, but you might assume that it's one word. And I believe that the people who solved this, and some people solved it quite early, and Tina solved it very quickly, then Rob and Nicola. I think they did a bit of a hybrid approach. They must have assumed, and you can correct me, they're here in the channel, they must have assumed that the grid looked something like this. I think their key insight was realizing that they had to fit those 26 letters into 24 boxes, and they figured out that they should put I and J into the same. And I think they started working at it from both ends, which is this hybrid thing I say at the end, which is they basically might have said, well, the most common symbol is this. It's probably an E or an O. Maybe it's a double. If you can get one word, and that last word, if you could have figured out that that last word was probably something like soon, which it was, and as soon as you fill in on your grid S, O, O, and N, then you might have detected a pattern, which is, I believe, what they did. They got themselves one word or a little bit close to a word. And then when they started filling in the grid, then they saw, okay, the grid is not arbitrary. It follows this pattern. And once you figure that out, you've got it. Debbie says, I tried an automatic solver and it couldn't solve it because there's not enough text. That's right. Well, that was the second piece of code I wrote. So the second piece of code I wrote was to treat this as a pure substitution cipher, which is assume that there is no square, there is no logic to it, but each symbol can be any arbitrary letter of the alphabet. As Debbie points out, there's such little text here that it's hard to figure it out. But I did write some code to look for specific plain text words that I thought might be in the message. And it turns out that they weren't, and I didn't use all of them. So that's how I messed up on my second piece of code. Matt says, if I and J are the combined, does the solution lead to the conclusion that Y and Z are also combined? Since the rest of the alphabet wasn't thrown off any. I think that's true, but more importantly, it doesn't matter. If you don't combine the I and the J, half of the letters get misaligned and give you gibberish. But if the letters at the end, the X and the Y or the Y and the Z, if any of those combination get put into the wrong cell, the message is still easily readable. It's the fact that when that I and the J are in separate cells, aren't combined, the entire message gets messed up. So is it Elgar Dorabella cipher? I've never heard of that. The lesson that I take out of this is, and then here is a picture. Let's see, what did I? Okay, so here were the lessons I took out of this. One is to code a better generic substitution cipher tool. There are some online, they're not that great. There are some that use dictionaries, but I think my idea is right to look for one where you can put in expected words and just do that a little bit better. But my big lesson was that I so carelessly saw this mismatch between having to put 26 letters into this 24 grid thing. And when I even did some searching on the internet and found this Polybius square, I saw that they combined I with J, but I just didn't pay any attention to it. I just thought it's not important. And it turns out it's critically important. And I think it's a general mistake that I tend to make often, which is I say, oh, here's a mismatch and don't worry about it. It's close enough. And really it turned out that that was the key. That was the key thing that messed me up, was not taking seriously the fact that you've got 26 letters to put into 24. And I think that kind of thing happens quite a bit in puzzles where you're like, well, we're looking for a 4-digit code, but this only gives us the 3-digit code. Let's just work on it. We'll figure that out later. It's clear that focusing on that as an opportunity is a better approach. So take that seriously. Formulate a reasoning. What's the logic between going from this mismatch to resolving it? And then look, as always, for a preference. Why should it be one way or the other? Anytime when you have this arbitrary thing, there's arbitrary ways to put 26 letters into 24. You should be looking for what's a reason why one should be preferred over the other. In this case, the reason is historical. Historically, the I's and J's have been combined. And there's a reason for that itself, probably history, evolution of the English alphabet. But and then I have this last dangling question is, could you ask the same thing about the rotations? In this case, you'd have to try, there's no logic to them. You'd have to try them all or get lucky. I did wonder myself if looking at these symbols, might you guess about a logical orientation? And one thing is I saw that the letters have some calligraphy where the C is thicker on the bottom top. And I wondered, well, if you write that a certain way, is there a natural way that you would write it that one would be natural? But I never came up with a solution to it. Maybe you guys do have a theory for why one seems more natural. This is sort of a thing that you would get out of an AI if you trained it, that you've got sort of prototypes and that there's one writing something clockwise or facing one direction is more natural than another. All right, so there we have it. And there was some of my code that if I had gotten the I and J, that's what it would have looked like, decoding all the different ways that the rotations could have gotten it. And then the bottom is my code looking for certain words in a substitution cipher. Okay, so there you have it, a long discussion of the cipher. Really great work, a humbling work to see Nicola and Tina, who got it right away, and then Rob very quickly, and Nicola and serendipitous. Lots of people got this solved. It was a humbling experience to work on it for 2 days and get stuck. Okay, finally, let us quickly review our notes for the first letter. There was one thing I wanted to point out, and then we will eventually open our next letter. All right, let me check in with the chat though and get a drink while we're going on this. So the channel mentioned the new Black Mirror. The new Black Mirror is great. I've watched the first 3 episodes, first 3 or first 4 episodes. They are good. They are much better than the last season. It's really quite good, I thought. Okay, a little mention of Elgar's Dorabella cipher, which I don't know. And Tina says, just an information adventure has a puzzle box on Kickstarter. Yeah, I've seen that. They've had that for a while. It's a very specific thing. It's a puzzle box assembled from 3D laser cut things. It doesn't look particularly appealing to me. I do wish they would put out more of their detective stories games. And Tina says it's better. Black Mirror is better than the last season. I still think Inside Number 9 was better. I'm really liking the new Black Mirror. Okay. So let's look at quickly the letter from last week. I wanted to point out one thing. All right, so we're given some questions. I've written notes. The one thing I wanted to make a note of was something that I may have gone through so quickly that I misunderstood it. When Ruth Dresser is describing all these people and scene to us, she tells us that there's this guy yelling at the butler, Niles, an elderly man roaring at poor Niles. And Dalton says, oh, that's Belsey, one of my father's old business associates, invited as a courtesy. Sitting next to him was another strange specimen of a man wearing a fur waistcoat, white spats, and a gold pin on his lapel. The man waved a bottle of wine before walking in our direction. But Niles whisked him away. And then at some point later, I met a guest worthy of noting while I was speaking with my aunt and uncle. A dandy named Sudden Maggs approached to introduce himself, as I might imagine Bronte's Heathcliff. He's a dark and dashing sort. He had arrived with a comely woman who seemed bejeweled rather than dressed. He also sported a golden pin on his lapel. I think I may have conflated these two people. But they're clearly separate people. Maybe you guys all know, maybe no one but me made that mistake. But I think I conflated the man with fur waistcoat with the gold pin with Sonny Maggs, who's a guy with who's the dandy with, I guess his outfit is not described too much. But these are clearly different people. And we don't meet this guy again. We don't know his name. We don't know anything about him. He's wearing a fur waistcoat. And I will notice we're told he's got a gold pin on his lapel. We're not told it's a mask pin. When we get down to Sonny, he's wearing a golden pin. But this one is very explicitly mentioned as a smiling mask. And now she says it's just like the one that Dalton wore a year ago when they met. So my first observation on rewriting it was that, okay, this is a separate person that we don't know about. He's got a bottle of wine and he's ushered away by Niles. Not sure why Niles knows to bring him away. Why does Niles take him away? Maybe I'll add that to my questions. Okay, did you all realize that was two separate people, or did it not occur to you, or did you think it was the same person? And then the last piece of that I'll mention here is that this description just told him that he's got a gold pen. Not clear that it's the same, that it's a mask. Could be just a coincidence. However, we do get the resolution to that a little bit subtly when we're told about the pin she finds in the fire. Because she says, I used a poker to pull the tarnished gold pin from the ashes. The pin was precisely like the one that Mr. Maggs and the fellow with the fur waistcoat wore. So now we know for sure that even though when she initially describes him, she doesn't say the fur guy had a gold mask pin, now we know he did. Okay. So it does seem like they're all from the same group. Now, this is especially important, though, when we decode our message, because the message we think may be coming from the woman. Our theory is that when she fed him the oyster and put the napkin in his pocket, our theory is that she put this secret note in his pocket. And the note is now... says, David knows he's gone mad, come soon. So with that note, in addition to the questions of who wrote it, why is it being burned, one question we have is, who is David? Now, we do have one David in our story. That's the newspaper guy from the Mirror, David David McBain. And he's the guy that Ward has a private meeting with. Then they come screaming out, he's a devil. The guy's smirking. So is it David who's gone mad? Focusing, and then he talks about how they're always focusing on his past. And in fact, the last thing she tells us is that a couple weeks ago, the police came right after that red-haired McBain came to see him. So McBain seems to be digging up his past, and if you take that new message that says David knows he's gone mad, is it possible that David, the writer for the Mirror, was a member of this group and knows about our guy's past and is trying to dig that up? So looking at the theories about the note, Rob says, I think the note was delivered before the party. So Rob doesn't think that the woman, Vesta, or Miss Victoria, put the note in his pocket. I wonder if David is enraged or insane. Well, gone mad seems to imply gone insane. But you could read the message as saying David knows he's gone mad. Does it mean David knows that he himself has gone mad? Or does David know that someone else has gone mad? Is the he assumed? Is part of the message burned off? One of our questions with the burned note was, if he ran in here because he's gotten sick, then he wouldn't have had time to burn the note. It must have been burned earlier. So let's just look at some of these notes I made. Here are the three questions we were presented with in the beginning of the case. Is he the victim of an attack? If so, exactly how? Who would want to hurt him with their accomplices? The items found in the dresser, what's their significance? I made a list of some people. We got Dalton, Ruth Dresser's family is mentioned. Papa, grandmother, Uncle Philip. Niles, the valet. Belsey, the elderly man. The dandy with the fur waistcoat. David McBain, the reporter. Hammersmith, the other reporter from the Telegraph, who we're told is a Labor Party backer. Sonny Maggs, who hands her, Ruth Dresser, the Club Coast card. Says he'll take her as a guest, which makes us think he runs the place or something. Then Vesta, otherwise known as Miss Victoria, who he tells his wife she just likes ruffling feathers. Sonny, she adores Sonny, just like I adore you. She's no assassin. So he's convinced she didn't poison him. This is her talking to him in the hospital. This convinces me that she didn't try to poison him. He would have told her if so, I suspect. Couple of facts. They met a year ago. He wore a gold pin when he met her, stopped wearing it. We think maybe that's the past. His past involvement in this club is the past that people are trying to drudge up and maybe blackmail him. I think she put a note in his pocket. There was blood in his vomit. Doctor says it was from an ulcer. And the food poisoning, we're not so sure. Someone rewrote on top of the newspaper article, instead of decency, indecency. And then there's this situation with the police inspector calling on him a couple of weeks ago, right after David McBain came to see him, the newspaper guy. And then lastly, some issues. The golden mask pin in the fire, is it Dalton's? Did he throw it away? If so, why has he thrown it away after a year of holding on to it? We were told by Ruth he was wearing it when they met, then he stopped wearing it. Is that his, if not whose? Then we're told that after he was fed the oyster, soon after, he stands up, he rushes into the kitchen from the garden. Our initial reading was that he was sick, he had food poisoning. But then I wondered, how does he get himself into the upstairs corridor where he's sick over a table of ornaments? Why not get sick in the kitchen? This really makes me think that this was designed to throw us off, and he actually wasn't sick when he ran into the house. And I note that the woman tried to follow him in, but she's pulled off by Sonny. So that's the question here. Why did he get sick in an upstairs corridor? When did the note, and I guess we don't know that he threw it in. When did someone throw the note and the pin into the fireplace? Was he poisoned by the food in the garden gathering? Or my theory was, did he try to commit suicide when he came in? I'm not sure I still believe that. If so, how? Another theory by the group was that he was poisoned by some fumes from the fireplace. Who left that marked up headline on his desk that said indecency? We're told David McBain came by last week but was turned away. What's that about? Ward says the newspaper wants to focus on his past where he's turned a corner. We are told she brings him water after the meeting. Ruth brings him water after the meeting. Obviously, she's not trying to poison him, but could something have been in that water? And then the decrypted note, David knows he's gone mad. Who is David? I guess another question is, who is the he? Is that David they're talking about? Okay, 35 minutes catching up. Let me see what the channel is saying. Okay. I think then, let's see. I read it was David has gone mad. David knows something, so he's become dangerous. Emmy says, I think the note caused both the pin and the note to be thrown in the fire as if it was done with that life. Song of the Lute says, David knows we're having an affair and we were in big trouble. Debbie says, mad usually implies insane, but you could use gone mad for slang for furious. Sounds too modern for Victorian times. Rob says, I think it's hyperbole. I think it's mad in terms of very upset. That's interesting. It's like you wouldn't have said gone mad. You would have said Rob is mad. I mean, David is mad. Come soon. Weird. But Debbie says, like I said, it's not usually used that way in Britain. At least in those days. Okay. And Tina says, I'm waiting for the next fiancé because it's called the Fickle Fiancés. Jonathan Warner says, I'm playing Lestrade. No poison was a medical condition. No more poisoning in this letter. So Jonathan believes the medical examiner that says it was an ulcer brought on by stress. I find that hard to believe. When he had the run-in with the newspaper guy, and that didn't seem to upset his stomach. It seemed to come out of nowhere. All right. Well, that's a long time spent on a recap. Let's open our next letter and read it. Anything else any other theories you want to talk about before we get this next letter? I'm going to go on the record saying that this Club Kos is not his enemy, not his poisoners. Rob says, I'm not totally convinced there was a poisoning either. We'll see if there are more attempts in his life. I think someone's trying to blackmail him. And we've talked about this before. Like, if you're blackmailing someone, you don't try to poison them. You want to get the money from them. So, on the other hand, if you're being blackmailed to reveal some secrets about this club in your past, maybe the club people don't want you to reveal it. But I definitely don't think the woman poisoned her with the oyster. But I'm not holding out the possibility that someone else poisoned. But I like the idea that he got sick, that he came in the house not because he was poisoned. That was my point. Okay. If he came in the house not because he's poisoned, but because he read that letter and maybe wanted to meet her, then something had to have poisoned him after he got in. That's why I think maybe the fire, maybe the burning of the note in the fire. Emmy says, I do think there was poisoning, but if it's food poisoning, why was no one else reported as getting ill? Okay. Here's our next letter. We've got a nice 2-page letter. 2-page double-sided, so a serious letter here. Full 4 pages of letter. All right, here we go. From Ruth, May 16th. So our original letter was May 13th, 3 days later. North Kensington, London. Dear Mr. Holmes, I understand you have previous commitments to which you must attend. Still, I am pleased to know you'll lend your mind to my investigation via the post. Your advice and counsel is invaluable to me, most of all your suggestion that I consider not only suspects but also plausible motives. I confess that I have been focused, perhaps solely, on who might wish to harm Dalton rather than why. Specifically, someone might want to do so. This noted, no individual or motive comes immediately to mind. I know I wrote of Dalton's past, of how he's risen from the ashes, but that is not to say he was out making enemies. His vices got the best of him and he struggled with finances, but his father would always help him back onto his feet. This was, in part, the problem. At university, Dalton grew used to getting his way and facing few consequences, but that changed after his graduation, particularly as he became interested in politics. I'm quite proud of him. Even so, like Dalton, I am no fool. In light of your questions, I presume you have more than one suspicious individual in mind. I have been fixated on Miss Victoria since seeing her feed Dalton the oyster. But your assessment is difficult to refute. My emotions may be clouding my judgment, and there were many other guests at our engagement party who might have had motive, certainly the opportunity, to poison my fiancé. With regard to Mr. Sonny Maggs, you will be pleased to learn that I had already sought him out at his James Street establishment, Club Coast, before receiving your instructions. Not a world traveler, I was unaware that Kos is an island and the home of the ancient temple of Dionysus, god of wine and pleasure. The name's significance became abundantly clear upon visiting the club, as the men there call it, for its members are, much like Dionysus, devoted to wine and pleasure. Standing beneath a simple mask painted on the wall outside, a doorman silently nods and allows entry to men who I presume are members. When I presented Mr. Maggs' card to the man, he escorted me through the building and to Mr. Maggs' office. The club might have had an unassuming facade, but its inner labyrinth contains opulent lounges occupied by inebriated people and boisterous rooms guarded by large men in ill-fitting suits. The terrain was rather far afield from that of my usual haunts, to put it mildly. Mr. Maggs' office was at the very rear of the building and was concealed by shimmering curtains rather than a door. He is handsome, I must confess, and was impeccably attired, debonair and witty. Yet I find his charm conspicuous. Unnatural. "You've accepted my offer. Welcome, Miss," came his greeting. "Miss Dresser," I answered. I waited for the doorman to leave, past 2 sparkling black curtains, then I thought I might catch Mr. Maggs off guard by speaking plainly. I stated that I wanted to know if he intended to harm Dalton, more precisely, to poison him. His face dilated with childish amusement. "Oh, your darling Dalton has been poisoning himself for years. He does a better job than anyone else could ever hope." I responded that while Dalton may have patronized Club Coast in bygone days, he now walks a different path. Mr. Maggs shook his head. "Oh, like the moon, every person has a side hidden in the darkness. Miss Dresser, you see only the bright and appealing side of Dalton, and that is most understandable." He held his hands out in supplication. "I am no judge of character, but his political folderol threatens my business." Leaning forward, perilously close, he whispered, "And I cannot have that. I only wish he would be more understanding." He smirked. I asked Mr. Maggs how it was that Dalton threatened his enterprise, and he pointed to Dalton's rally 2 weeks earlier at the foot of the Temperance Fountain near Blackfriars Bridge. I was at that rally, I replied. "Well, then you well know the Women's Christian Temperance Union aims to have businesses much like mine permanently closed." I began, "Well, I stand with Dalton in fighting the inequities, temptations, and vices that plague us all, Mr. Maggs," and before I could address his threat any further, he rang a silver bell on his desk. "Oh, I've heard the speeches, Miss Dresser, spare me." Moments later, several curtains swung apart and the tall, lithe Miss Victoria walked in. Please see Miss Dresser out. We're done," he said. She twisted her lips and held aside a glittering curtain for me. "Sweet of you to visit the club." I followed her out and through a wooden door at the side of the building, which left me just around the corner from the entrance with the mask above it. As you might imagine, I walked away from Club Coast, feeling the press of encroaching doubts. These feelings became more apparent when I took your advice to speak with Mr. David McBain of the Daily Mirror. Okay, so we've got his motive, the Club Coast motive, and we know what they're about. It's not some secret cult, it's just a drinking debauchery club. Now she's talking to McBain, who we are very suspicious about. "When I discovered Mr. McBain was not at his desk, I asked to speak to his superior and was led to a spacious office in a corner of the building. From within, I was surprised to hear my name called. It was a man with a low, beetling brow and a somewhat bulbous, roseate nose. Motioning me to a chair, he introduced himself as Dennis Hachette, editor. The bald man shuffled through a squalor of paper littering his desk to retrieve a photograph. I recognized it. It showed Dalton and me at the Temperance Fountain rally weeks earlier. We stood before a statue of a bare-breasted woman, seemingly pouring water over our heads. He placed the photograph on his desk. To what do I owe the pleasure, Miss Dresser?" I initiated our conversation by quickly coming to the point with a question. "Do you feel as if the Mirror treats Dalton fairly, Mr. Hachette?" The editor didn't blink. We don't conjure news, Miss Dresser, we report it. And McBain is the finest of the fine when it comes to political matters. A man's only fault, if it can truly be considered a fault, is his adoration of that poet Burns. I understand McBain's recent stories have been somewhat dour, but that's his way of writing lately. He's going through a great deal of grief. Certainly he doesn't have a vendetta on your husband or any of the people he writes about." He went on to say that McBain experienced a horrible tragedy 3 weeks previous, the death of his fiancée. I asked why he did not assign a different reporter to follow Dalton if this was so. Hachette said, he requested to take on any work I had. He said it would help take his mind off the loss. McBain has earned his place here. Hachette then mumbled something about McBain's lost sense of humor and suggested I speak directly with the man himself. I would like nothing better, said I. Hachette raised his hands. Well, you're welcome to return on Wednesday. He'll be here early by 8. I smiled. Thank you. If you do see him, please let him know I would most appreciate an interview. And made my exit, leaving the office. A woman sitting nearby turned in her chair and winked at me. Now, you may be too posh for David. No wonder he's ducking you. I asked why she believed I was a friend of Mr. McBain. She said, well, you're the kind of woman old Davy would think he deserves. When I assured her that I had had no personal interest in the man, she added, oh, careful with unrequited love, dearie. I gave a brief laugh and excused myself. Mr. Holmes, I followed your suggested avenues of investigation and reported as requested. I'm beginning to understand why you foresaw that this investigation might prove distressful. For as I walked from the offices of the Mirror, I realized that this London rag was living up to its name. I could not help but take a good look at myself and my marriage to Dalton, and nagging doubts were surfacing. When I arrived at Dalton's sick room, his bed was surrounded with flowers from well-wishers, and he was in grand spirits. This grinning man is the Dalton I know and love. As he rattled on about his recent visitors, I sat at the foot of his bed and enjoyed the bouquet. Reading the attached cards, putting one down, I noticed wilted lilies in the dustbin and reached for the note fixed to them. Dalton halted mid-sentence, patted the mattress, and asked me to come sit closer by him as he raved about his return to the campaign trail. I could see that he was happy in his anticipation, and I did not want to sour his mood by reporting my recent conversations with Mr. Maggs, Miss Victoria, and Mr. Hachette. Still, I did remark that Niles had mentioned something about a police inspector who had called on him a few weeks prior. Is everything all right? I asked. He chuckled. Oh, I'd almost forgotten about that. It was an inquiry about a poor woman I barely knew. I suspect I was one of many interviewed. I must have looked doubtful because Dalton took my hand and added, oh, it doesn't concern me or us. I'm focused on the future, our future. My mood brightened as he spoke of our upcoming honeymoon in Greece. Time passed quickly, then, and before long a nurse entered and announced that visiting time was over. I said my goodbyes and left Dalton's room. As I turned the corner, the nurse caught me by the elbow and whispered that Dr. Blaine wished to see me. I was led to an office at the end of the hall where Dr. Wilson Blaine held court. Can I assume you are the closest family that Mr. Ward has in London? He began. I nodded. He then said that while Dalton was improving, he was not in good health. Dalton's ulcers explained the blood in the spew that day. He fell ill, however. Dalton's ulcers explained the blood in the spew that day he fell ill. However, I did not know that his liver was also impaired. Explaining this, the doctor placed a glistening object the size of a pea on his desk and pushed it toward me with the tip of a pencil. And we found this in Mr. Ward's system, in a stool. I bent lower and gingerly touched it with the tip of my finger. A diamond? I speculated. Blaine said that they thought as much, but that analysis had revealed it was a counterfeit. The doctor picked it up and rolled it between his fingers. It has sharp edges that easily aggravated Mr. Ward's impaired gastrointestinal system. Good you came straight away. He could have bled to death. Recalling how that bogus bauble may have entered Dalton's system, I prepared myself for Dr. Blaine's next logical question, but it was not forthcoming, so I pressed on and asked the doctor if Dalton knew about the stone. He shook his head, saying that he thought he would talk to me first. I haven't a clue how or what he might have done, was all I managed to say. Dr. Blaine fixed his spectacles onto his nose. Oh, my father, he was also a doctor. He once encountered a man with this compulsion to consume all sorts of objects. Pebbles, dirt, small bits of metal, I think. He worked as a groundskeeper, so he was able to keep it a secret until he finally fell ill and was sent to the hospital. You've never witnessed your fiancé eating anything out of the ordinary, have you? Has he been eating less lately? I shook my head. No. The doctor continued, Well, I'll inform him about the stone. He'll have to adhere to a special diet for about a month, but provided he doesn't find himself consuming any other rocks, he has no need to worry. I twisted the engagement ring on my finger as the doctor finished. Watch him carefully, and please call on me should you notice anything unusual regarding his food or his manner of eating. From the hospital, I walked to my papa's house, seeking his solace and advice. Afterward, with the help of time and some excellent sherry, I regained my resolve and attempted to make sense of the charred note from Dalton's hearth. As you suspected, I was unaware of the fact that the scribbles comprise a simple substitution cipher which requires a larger sample to be truly understood. I endeavored to look for patterns in symbol frequency, especially with the relation to the English or perhaps Greek alphabets, but I have made no headway. If I encounter anything similar in my further inquiries, I will do my best to identify any such patterns and will report whatever I have discovered. I intend to know the entire truth. Okay, so there's our letter. I think, well, we've got some real developments here. And it sounds like he wasn't poisoned, but he ate that little fake diamond, which upset his stomach. This seems, well, I was going to say it seems to confirm that when he ran into the kitchen, he wasn't sick. But I suppose she could have put the thing in the oyster in the fake diamond in the oyster and fed him that. So I guess that's always a possibility. But that wouldn't have been, what would have been the point to that? I don't see what. She couldn't have known that would have made him sick. All right, let's just see what is interesting here. So she goes to Club Kos. And she goes to Club Kos. And we're told that it's just a club for drinking, basically, and debauchery. And then he says, his political folderol threatens my business. And he says, I cannot have that. I only wish he would be more understanding. So he's already told him about it, tried to get him to stop. He won't listen. And we know it's about the temperance movement. Christian Temperance Union aims to have business like mine closed. Okay, so now we have a motive for why he wants to stop Dalton, and he could have had that newspaper article. I guess not, but he wants Dalton to stop with this support of the temperance movement. And then when she says, I'm going to support my husband, he says, I don't want to talk to you anymore. He calls her, sends her away. She says, so Vesta, Victoria comes and escorts her out. Sweet of you to visit the club, but nothing else. Then she goes to try to find David McBain, who's not at his desk. But she speaks with his boss, Dennis Hachette, the editor. And they've got a photo of them at the temperance movement. And then we're told more about David McBain. He says he's a good writer. His only fault is adoration of the poet Burns. That's something we might want to look up. It's not immediately clear to us how that's relevant or what that would mean. But he says he doesn't have a vendetta on your husband. But then he tells us about a tragedy where he lost his fiancée. Death of his fiancée. And he's requested to stay busy. Something about his lost sense of humor. Wednesday at 8, he'll be back to talk to him. And then we run into another woman as we're leaving. The woman says, "You may be too posh for David. You're the kind of woman Davy would think he deserves. Careful with unrequited love, dearie." So, is David McBain become jealous, mad with jealousy because of his wife? Is that what the note was about? Has he gone mad with his tragedy and wants to take it out on our guy? Then we go to the hospital, and we notice he's got lots of cards and letters, but there's one he doesn't want us to see. Let's see. We ask him about the police that came to the house a few weeks ago. He says it was about a poor woman I barely knew. A woman I barely knew. Doesn't concern me or us. Talks about their future and their honeymoon. He seems in good spirits. Where does she see the flowers? Okay. Wilted lilies in the dustbin. Reach for the note. And Dalton doesn't want her to look at it. Then we talk to the doctor, who says we found this in his excrement. A glistening object the size of a pea. And it's not a diamond, it's a counterfeit diamond. And that's what causes upset stomach. And then a little bit more to help us figure out how to decode the cipher. All right, let's check in with the chat and see about theories. Okay. Police visit was presumably related to, Debbie thinks maybe it was about the David McBain's fiance's death. That's a very good theory. Was the woman that the police came to talk to him, and that McBain came to talk to him afterwards, McBain's fiancée? Nice. It's about a woman I barely knew. So McBain's fiancée, I like this theory. So is our ward involved with McBain's fiancée? Okay, and now the question is, Rob says, did he try to hide stolen diamonds by swallowing them? Is drug mule? It wasn't a real diamond, fake engagement or marriage. What is the significance of the lilies and the note in the dustbin? I wonder if it might have been flowers and a card from McBain saying, like, I know you were with my wife, my fiancée. John says, oyster would be a good way to get him to ingest it if the person knows he swallows oysters whole. Yeah, but I want to point out that I still think it's most likely that he ran into the house, burned stuff, and then went to that upstairs corridor table of ornaments and like tried to swallow the... Maybe he tried to swallow it to hide it, and that's when he got sick. Let's see. Debbie says, could the original note with the cryptic message come from David's fiancée having an affair with Dalton and communicating in code, and David himself killed her when he found out? Huh. That's an interesting theory. And Tina says, what I know about Burns is he's the national poet of Scotland. So maybe gives us more confirmation that this red-headed David McBain is Scottish. Police definitely question him about the reported fiancé's death. Everyone seems to have figured that out. I wonder if Dalton previously was smuggling diamonds. I think it's more likely that we're told by this woman that our Miss Ruth Dresser is more upper class than the people David's normally with. So if I had to guess, I would guess that this fake diamond is a piece of jewelry of the woman. And he's maybe just eating it just to get rid of it. Jonathan says, maybe Vera, you mean Vesta. John says, maybe Vesta's working with McBain. If word is strung along Vesta and McBain's fiancé, that way it would make sense for Vesta to have ingest the diamond with the oyster. Rob says, Vesta was more bejeweled than dressed. Maybe the diamond accidentally dropped into his mouth when he was fed oyster. Well, that's a good point. She is covered in little bejeweled diamonds, so one could have fallen into the oyster. Even if the diamond caused him to be sick, it doesn't sound like something that would have had that instant an effect. I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm not sure. If he's got an ulcer and he swallowed a diamond, it might have a quick effect in terms of the story world. Or just plucked up and put in the oyster. That's an interesting thing. I still feel like the fact that he got sick on the upstairs corridor makes me think he wasn't sick from food poisoning. But it is an interesting idea. I like the idea that our guy... Oh, and we're also told in here, Ruth thinks he's finished with that was in the past, his bad days where he was out drinking and sleeping around. And Mags tells her, you think he's done with that life, but he's not. He says, all men... Let's see, what does it say? She says, he tells her he's still going to be involved in this stuff. She says, Dalton may have done it in the old days. He's on a different path now. And he says, every person has a side hidden in the darkness. You see only the bright. All right, so I like the idea that he's still going to this club. He's still got his pin. And he wears it to get into this club. He's still spending his nights at the club. And something has spooked him at the engagement party, and he's run into his house and thrown everything into the fire. thrown his pin into the fire. Something spooked him. It's not clear what. Something spooked him to cause him to run in and throw his pin into the fire. That's his pin, which means he has been going to that club secretly, and he has been having an affair with the reporter's wife. And it makes sense that the thing that spooked him is this note. It would also make sense that Victoria gave him the note in his pocket, and she's basically told him, maybe she's told him that the newspaper guy's going to get him. And so he's realized he's got to go hide all of the evidence that he knew the fiancé. So he's burning the pin, and maybe he's trying to get rid of the diamond. He can't burn it, but he's going to swallow it. Maybe he fears the police are going to raid his house or something. The diamond wasn't regurgitated and passed right through. Maybe he didn't have ulcers at all, just cuts from the diamond. Debbie says the fickle fiancés implies maybe that both were faithless. In other words, Ward here was not faithful, and the fiancé of the newspaper writer wasn't faithful. I like the idea that he's trying to get rid of evidence. I like the idea that it's it's the fiancé's diamond bauble, not his, and he's getting rid of it from the house. I wonder if he suspects someone's So it's possible that that note was from the fiancé that died, and he's burning it to get rid of the evidence. Or it's possible that Victoria Vesta gave him the note, and that triggered him to throw everything away. But I like the idea that he's in some sort of rush to hide all evidence. I'm not sure there's a blackmailer anymore. I think what's happened is he's trying to hide evidence that he was with the reporter's fiancé. Something has spooked him into thinking he has to get rid of that evidence immediately. So he's run into the house, he's thrown his pin in the fire, the note in the fire, and he's gone up and swallowed the diamond of the fiancé that he somehow has with him. But what would have spooked him? It's still not clear to me who wrote the note. If we think that a Ward was meeting up with the newspaper writer's fiancé at the club, that would mean that the newspaper writer doesn't come to the club. So Vesta would have no reason to know about him, so that would be unlikely that Vesta wrote him that note. Maybe it's just an old note from the fiancé that he was hanging out with. John says, I have to go. Check in later, see the theories. The note writer is David's now dead fiancé. Yeah, so Rob thinks that the note is old, and he was just trying to burn it to hide the evidence. Song of the Lute said, the moment at the party when he suddenly stands up, that sounds like the trigger. Yeah, but what happened there that made him think what happened that made him think he had to rush in and dispose of the evidence? Is there some reason he thinks the police are about to come to his house? So here's an alternative theory. An alternative theory is that the fake diamond actually was in the oyster. He sits down, he realizes he's going to be sick, and he feels like he has to rush to get rid of the evidence because he knows he's going to be out of the house in the hospital. I don't love that. I was very happy with the idea that he rushed into the house not sick. And he's trying to, he put that diamond in his mouth from the table of ornaments. That's what I think. Emmy says he swallowed it earlier. Emmy says there's got to be better ways of getting rid of the diamond, and I don't think it would have caused him to be sick that fast. I think it definitely could have caused him to get that sick that fast. We're told it's very sharp and everything, but he would have to have thought that the police were about ready to arrive and search his house. If you thought the police were about to arrive and search your house, then you would rush in, burn everything, and then try to swallow the diamond. You would swallow it if it belonged to the woman, or would you just try to flush it down the toilet or something? If he thought he could have destroyed the golden pin in the fire, why not the diamond? Because I think he thought that the golden pin would melt, but the diamond wouldn't. I don't know why you wouldn't throw it out the window, though. But swallowing it might have seemed reasonable. I just wish we had a better sense of what triggered him. And why would he have kept the note from the fiancé? Why would he have kept the note? That would be so incriminating. We're not told anything that would have triggered him to suddenly rush in, but it does feel like he rushed in to get rid of the evidence. I like the idea that the note was written by the now dead newspaper writer's fiancé, but if that's the case, and the note was written to him, it had to have been weeks old. Why does he still have it, and why is he now in a rush to burn it? Is it possible that Vesta... Is it possible that Vesta's intercepted this note? And has like put in his pocket this note, not from her, but from the woman he was having an affair with weeks ago, as if like a threat. That's the not blackmail threat, but the extortion threat. Extortion? That she's basically saying, hey, you better stop this temperance movement stuff or we're going to reveal that we know about the affair. And maybe somehow Vesta and Sonny Maggs have collected evidence on him like a club that collects blackmail information. And maybe she was letting him know that she knows about the affair, and that was what freaked him out. My theory there is that at the club, that this club that they're running is not just for drinking and womening and all that stuff, but it's to collect blackmail evidence against people that are going to the club and doing things they shouldn't. And so that maybe Vesta and Sonny Maggs have collected information, have intercepted this note. Like maybe it was a note. Imagine this. The newspaper woman's fiance goes to the club looking for our guy Ward. This is weeks ago. Doesn't find him. Writes a secret message that says, come soon. Says, give this to Ward as soon as he arrives. So now the Vesta and Sonny Maggs have the secret note left by the woman for Ward, but never give it to him. Hold on to it as a piece of leverage against him. And now she's fed him this oyster and put the note in his pocket as if to say, we know you are having an affair with this woman. And as soon as he gets it and reads it, he realizes that they've got information on him, and so he rushes to the house to get rid of all evidence, including that note. So Dalton Ward looks at the note. He decodes it because it's written in a code that he and the woman he's been seeing have agreed on. He realizes that Vesta is trying to extort him and that someone else knows about his affair. So he rushes to the house to get rid of all the evidence, including the little diamond that the woman gave him. That's the little bit weird part. Debbie says, clearly the police did, and Nantina both say the police did visit him about the death. So they do, there is other evidence that possibly links him. Yeah, like maybe the reporter suspects it. The come soon part makes me pretty sure the note is from the dead girl, not from Vesta or similar. I agree with that. But then it has to be an old note. And the question is, was it an old note he was just holding on to? And now he suddenly decided to burn it? Or was it an old note that Vesta and Sonny Maggs intercepted and were threatening him? And don't forget the flowers and note in the hospital. Do we think that might be from David McBain threatening him? Or from Vesta and Sonny Maggs threatening him? saying, you better... So I think we don't know when the note was burned. Well, surely it had to have been burned not weeks ago. I suspect what we're going to see now is that Ward has made changes tune on the temperance movement if he thinks they have information on him. But would they really give him the note? If that's our good evidence against him, if that's their good evidence against him, would they really want to give him the note? Wouldn't they want to hold that to use against him? Maybe they don't need proof. Maybe that just the fact that they know is enough. Well, if I had to come up with a theory, that would be my theory. He's having an affair with David McBain's fiancée. When he's going out to this club, she's left him a note at the club, and she died that night. Maybe she was killed by the newspaper guy, not by our guy, killed someone else, but he's worried that it will come out that he's had an affair with her, which will ruin his whole political career. The newspaper guy is threatening to reveal it, and now Vesta and Sonny Maggs know about it and are using it to try to extort him to change his position. And that at the party, Vesta put the note in his pocket. He sat down. He found the note. He realized that someone knows that the woman, Sonny Maggs and Vesta, know about his affair, and he's rushed in the house to hide all evidence, including getting rid of the little fake diamond that was on a piece of jewelry that she gave him, or that he was going to... Yeah, I guess not that he was going to give to her. Piece of jewelry that she left at her house. He threw the diamond away, something like that. Don't love it, but that's my best theory I can come up with. Or it may be that she was killed either by the newspaper guy, or she was killed in some accident. Debbie says, I largely agree with Jesse, except that I think the note came directly from his mistress. I guess that's possible. But then what makes him rush into the house to burn it? And why is he held on to it? Emmy says, the reporter has plenty of posh women coming to see him by the sounds of it, dishing dirt on them or their husbands. The reporter's person says, you're too posh for him. You may be too posh for David. No wonder he's ducking you. I asked why she believed I was a friend, and she said, well, you're the kind of a woman old Davy would think he deserves. Debbie says, do we know he rushed to burn it? Well, I mean, that's kind of our theory with the... something has made him jump up out of his seat and rush into the house, at which point he gets sick. So he had to have ingested that diamond once he got... Either she fed it to him in the oyster, or I feel like the place he got sick suggests that he went upstairs, went inside, burned the note and the pin, and then went to the ornament table. And for some reason, that little diamond, fake diamond, was evidence against him, and he tried to get rid of it. And Tina says, do you think the reporter was laughing when he left his office because he told him that he knew? Yeah, it's a good question. Why is the reporter got a smirk on his face? I do think the reporter told him something like, I know you had the affair with my wife. I'm going to write about it. Debbie says he could have rushed in just because he was ill after swallowing the diamond. Yes, that's possible. I don't buy this idea that those note and pin was put in the fireplace weeks ago. That just does not make sense to me. I don't see how they would have survived for weeks. Feels to me like they were just put in right away. And then again, if he rushed into the, it sounds like Rob and Debbie both think it might have been burned weeks earlier. The thing is, if he rushed in because the diamond was making him sick, why is he found upstairs? Wouldn't he rush into the kitchen and get sick right there? That's what makes me think he came in for other reasons. And he got sick when he was trying to dispose of the diamond. Maybe his toilet was upstairs. It's possible. He got sick over a table of ornaments. Imagine you're going to get sick. Imagine you're this rich person in your rich house. All of a sudden, your stomach feels terribly sick, like you're going to retch, in terrible pain. You don't go over to a table of ornaments like you've got a little bit of control. You would try to rush for a bathroom or a floor or a bucket or an empty floor. You would have enough control if you had enough time to get into the house. You wouldn't be getting sick off a table of ornaments. That's just insanity. Emmy says, I still think the diamond's more likely to be swallowed earlier in the day, giving it time to damage his stomach. That's a very interesting point. I mean, it's an interesting question, and it deals with an issue of how realistic the game is and stuff. And I don't know. Here's my thinking, though. You would not have swallowed a diamond unless it was by accident or in a huge rush to hide evidence. You wouldn't just be like, well, I'm not in a rush, but I want to get rid of this, so I'm going to swallow it. Never. So either the woman fed it to him and her little fake diamond fell in the oyster, and then it took a couple minutes and then made him sick. Or he rushed in the house to get rid of evidence and swallowed it. You can't have, it'd have to be, and only the oyster would be the only way you would swallow the diamond without knowing it. So either she put it in his oyster but for what reason? Well, it's a good question why it didn't come up. I think that's a good point. Song over the loot thinks, well, maybe he made himself sick in order to bring the diamond back up again. Rob says he tried to run to the bathroom, had to stop and vomit on the way, which was at the table of the ornaments. Debbie agrees with Rob. I don't buy it. Here's the thing, though. Let's say your theory is that Sonny, Mags, and Victoria have a reason they want him. They have a motive for wanting to get rid of him, right? Threatening him. But what's your theory for why she would put one of her jewels in the oyster? Like, what's her theory? What's her purpose? That's the part that doesn't make sense. You can't have thought that it would kill him. You have to poison someone. You'd have to put poison in it if you wanted to kill him. Putting the fake diamond in the oyster, to what end? Why would she purposely do that? And surely you don't really believe it was a coincidence. So that's the part that doesn't make sense to me. If you think the diamond was put in the oyster, I don't see why. I don't see what they hope to achieve. Yeah, but even if they're unrelated, Rob says the oyster diamond could be an accident. It's a red herring. Really? You really think she accidentally dropped one of her jewels in an oyster? That just seems so far-fetched, such a coincidence. Those kinds of coincidences are not going to happen in a case like this. The diamond was in the stool, so it had to be swallowed earlier. No, don't forget. This day where she's meeting him has been like a whole day has passed. A whole 24 hours has passed. He's gotten flowers. She's gone on. It's 2 days later. So he's had time to digest things. And surely and you know the diamond wasn't weeks ago. Although we are told he has an ulcer, is it possible that the diamond is from like weeks ago and it's causing the ulcers? Let me see here. Ulcers explain the blood the day he fell ill. His liver was also impaired. Okay, so this is our clue that he was out drinking still, right? The fact that his liver's impaired, so he was still out drinking and partying. We found this in his system, in his stool. Counterfeit. Sharp edges easily aggravated his system. He could have bled to death. So I think he could have eaten it that moment when he went into the house to hide it. But there's no conceivable world where he ate it weeks ago, right? So it would have had to have been recently. Hey, here's a theory. Is it possible that this is the smirking newspaper guy who's gone mad, that he has somehow put his fiancée's diamond, made Ward eat it? Is there something about them taking a piece of cake in? I want to read this here. Like, remember the guy comes out smirking and he comes out yelling, the man's a devil. The Daily Mirror can't wait another minute. Let's have that interview. This is on our previous letter. He took a last bite of cake and escorted McBain to the study. Dalton burst out of the house, bellowing, the man's a devil. McBain comes past him with a satisfied smirk. Is he smirking because he's just told him, hey, you just ate, you're so in love with my fiancée, I just fed you her thing. Weird. But it would sort of make sense. And if this guy, David McBain's gone a bit mad out of anger that this guy's seeing his wife, you could see how he would like do that as a sort of sociopathic piece of revenge. Rob says, I guess David could have somehow fed him the diamond as part of his revenge. Then we would be back to the old theory that he felt sick while he was sitting there and ran in. Veggie Dog says, the lilies and note in Dalton's hospital wastebin were wilted. Maybe they were old flowers and note Dalton had sent to the reporter's fiancée's funeral, sent back to Dalton as a threat. That's an interesting idea. When exactly did she die? We're told it was a few weeks ago. Debbie says, could David told him outright that he killed the fiancée? And he can't tell anyone because it would mean admitting to the affair. That's an interesting idea, too. So, if you believe that the note and the pin were put in the fireplace long ago, then you sort of got a consistent story that maybe this guy fed him the diamond as punishment, revealed to him, I know you were sleeping with my wife. Then he sits down. Half hour later, he gets sick. He runs in the house. He tries to make it upstairs to his personal bathroom, and he gets sick on the table. That's one chain of theories. Then the other chain of theory is that he's given the note by Vesta or whatever. He realizes he's got to dispose of evidence. He runs in the house. He puts the stuff in the fire. He runs upstairs, he gets this bauble for some reason and tries to get rid of it right away. And Tina says, if he tried to hide the diamond, why not look for it in his stools, ingested without knowing? That's an interesting point, says Antina. Maybe, but if he's bedridden, what is he going to say? Oh, before you throw away that bedpan, can I look through it? Maybe he's just hoping they're going to dump it and not see it. And Tina says, I think his fiancée would have found the note in the fireplace, or it would have been clean if it was weeks ago. I like the idea that McBain has fed him a little diamond from his fiancée and said, choke on it, you know. You wanted her, now you got her, choke on it. But I don't like the idea of him being sick while he's sitting there. Let's see. Rob says, maybe they didn't use the fireplace in May. No need for cleaning. Yeah, but then would that be where you would try to dispose of it? We're told she uses the poker to get it out. Is she told it was running? I guess it is May. No need to run it. But prompted by a small glimmer in the hearth, I used the poker to pull a tarnished pin from the ashes. Next to it, a burned scrap of paper. I think you've got an interesting point now. You're starting to convince me a little bit with this May thing. So maybe she dies 3 weeks ago. The cops come to see him. They say, do you know this girl? He says, no, I never heard of her. I'm not involved with her. The cops leave, and he disposes of the evidence. But then he would have put it in his hearth 3 weeks ago. But if they're not using the fireplace, why would that wouldn't be a logical place to get rid of evidence? Like, if you're going to get rid of it, you have to put it where there's a fire. You can't just throw it in there and say, well, in 6 months, we'll turn on the fire. Rob says, description of the ashes doesn't mention them smoking or smoldering, so it wasn't recent. Yeah. Okay, let's say he does get this note. Let's say when he finds out she's dead, he burns the note and the pin. So 3 weeks ago, the cops come to him. They say, we found this woman. She's dead. Did you know her? No, I don't know her. I don't know anything about this. Cops leave. He's like, I got to burn all evidence of her. So at that point, 3 weeks ago, he starts a fire. He throws the stuff in it, and then he leaves, assuming it will burn. So it's old. And he goes back to his life. And then they're at the... Maybe that's when he says, okay, we should get married early. And then he meets with McBain, who feeds him the diamond secretly. And Tina says, wouldn't he have seen that it wasn't burned enough from 3 weeks ago? You'd think. She went the next day. There wasn't going to be any smoking. She did go the next day. So even if he had lit it on fire on the day of their engagement, maybe it would have burned out. Well, I'm not sure now. I feel like these are two good theories. I do like the idea that the journalist, McBain, has gone a little bit crazy and has put his fiance's jewel in the piece of cake that Ward was eating. Emmy says, if he burns the pin to distance himself from the fiancé weeks ago, why invite the old associates who wear the pin to the engagement party? I'm not sure he did invite them, or if they didn't just show up. Debbie says, David's attitude cinches it for me, clinches it. He's clearly not grieving that much over his fiancé's death. It's true. People have just showed up. We're not sure exactly why, but it's not clear. We don't know if they weren't invited. We don't know, but it's a big, giant engagement. They may have just shown up. All right, what I think we're going to do is we're going to end this here or soon. But feel free to leave more comments on this video, or you can go to the Board Game Geek Guild section for this channel, for the Co-op for Two channel. There's a link on the About page of the YouTube. And there's a thread there talking about Dear Holmes. You can post your theories there. Or go to the Discord for this channel. Again, a link in the About page where you can talk live with each other and with me about your theories. We'll have time next week, of course, to recap and think about them again. Lots of things to chew on. I'm not sure there's a real solid way to distinguish between these two basic theories we have. But they're both compelling in their own way and little variations, but very interesting discussion. Clearly lots to think of. The channel is still going strong. It's at their house. Why would they have an open door? He doesn't seem so grief-stricken. This is a fishy case. All right. Well, we're going to sign off here. We'll be playing something else this week as well. You can stop by the Game Queue thread on BGG for this channel to help decide what to play next. Maybe another Cryptic Killers game. Maybe another Mythos Tales game. We'll see. Thanks for joining me. If you like this content and want to see more Dear Holmes, well, let's be honest. I'm going to keep playing these Dear Holmes cases, whether you give this video a like or not. But I do appreciate it. If you do like this content and want to see more of it, you can consider giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to the channel. Let me know if you have suggestions about how to cover these play-by-mail games, these Dear Holmes games. Do you think these sessions should be shorter, multiple times per week? Is there a different way I can present this? Are we spending too much time on this? If you're watching this after the fact, let me know what you think of this case. I am interested to see the next letter. I think it's going to be in time, so hopefully if all goes well, we'll meet again next week, Sunday, 3 p.m. to open letter number 3. I'll see you all next time.